The bond between Michael and Finn, forged in innocence and childhood, was severed by the harsh realities of life. Years later, when fate brings them back together, their reunion is a shock, not just for Michael, but for the entire world. Can love between a boy and a wild animal survive after so many years? Or has the wild nature of the creature once raised with affection turned it into a threat? Arizona, a state known for its scorching deserts and towering mountain ranges, was where the Hall family lived. Their home sat on the edge of Flagstaff, nestled in the high desert, where the land stretched wide and empty, dotted with sagebrush and cacti. The sun, relentless and fierce, cast an unyielding heat over the land, while the mountains to the north stood as silent witnesses to the harsh beauty of the region. For Michael Hall, a 10-year-old boy, this place was everything. He didn't mind the heat or the isolation. In fact, he reveled in it. The wide open spaces allowed him to roam freely, where he could explore the hills and watch the wildlife that called this harsh place home. From the coyotes that howled in the distance to the hawks that soared above, Michael felt more at peace in the desert than anywhere else. But it wasn't just the landscape that captured Michael's heart, it was the animals. Since he could remember, he had always felt a deep connection to creatures of all kinds. Whether it was the desert rabbits that darted in and out of the brush or the deer that grazed near the forest's edge, he was fascinated by the way animals adapted and survived in such a tough environment. His parents often warned him not to get too close to the wild animals, but Michael's fascination was more than just curiosity, it was a calling. His love for animals was something his family had come to accept, though they didn't always understand it. One particularly hot day in the summer of Michael's 7th year, everything changed. Michael had wandered farther from home that day, a small leather satchel filled with water and snacks slung across his shoulder. The desert air was dry, and the ground was cracked from weeks without rain. Michael made his way through the rocky outcrops near the base of the San Francisco Peaks, where the land sloped upward, and juniper trees scattered the hills. That's when he saw it, a small figure, barely more than a few weeks old, curled up near a bush, looking frail and vulnerable. As Michael approached, he realized it was a bear cub. His heart raced. The cub's fur was dark, matted with dirt, and its eyes were wide with fear. It was alone. Michael froze, knowing that it was dangerous to approach a wild animal, especially a bear. But the cub didn't run. It simply watched him, its eyes wide, and its small body trembling. Something inside Michael clicked. He knew instinctively that this little bear needed help, he couldn't just leave it alone. "Hey there, little guy," Michael whispered, crouching down slowly, his voice gentle. The cub looked at him curiously but didn't move. Michael reached into his satchel, pulling out a piece of jerky he'd packed for himself, and held it out. The cub's nostrils flared, drawn to the smell of food. Tentatively, it took a few steps closer, sniffing the air. Slowly, Michael extended his hand, offering the food. To his surprise, the bear cub stepped forward, nosing at the jerky, and gently took the piece from his hand. From that moment on, Finn, as Michael decided to name the bear cub, became his constant companion. Michael spent the next few weeks caring for the cub, feeding him, and making sure he had water. His parents weren't thrilled, but Michael's persistence eventually won them over. They allowed him to keep Finn for a while, though they made it clear that it wasn't a long-term solution. In the days that followed, Michael and Finn formed a bond that was unlike anything Michael had ever experienced. Finn wasn't just a wild animal to Michael, he was a friend, a companion, someone who understood him in a way no one else could. At first, Finn was playful and curious, often following Michael around the yard as if he were just another puppy. Michael would talk to him for hours, telling him stories about his day, sharing his dreams and fears. Finn would listen, his dark eyes fixed on Michael, occasionally nudging him or pawing playfully at his legs. As Finn grew, so did their connection. Michael knew that raising a bear wasn't easy, but the thought of letting him go seemed unbearable. They were inseparable. Finn's playful antics and strong affection for Michael filled the boy's world with joy. Finn was more than just a pet, he was a brother of sorts, a living creature that had been a part of Michael's life since the day they had met. But as Finn grew larger, the challenges began to mount. It wasn't just that Finn was becoming too large for their home, he was becoming a wild animal, one that required a great deal of care. Michael's parents, seeing the growing responsibility, began to voice their concerns. "Michael, we've talked about this," his father, John, said one evening, his voice filled with concern. "Finn isn't a dog. He's not a pet. He's a wild animal. You can't keep him forever." Michael's mother, Rachel, nodded, looking at her son with a soft but firm expression. "It's too dangerous, Michael. We can't keep him here. He's going to grow into a bear, and bears don't belong in the backyard. We can't keep living this way." Michael tried to argue, but deep down, he knew they were right. Finn was growing stronger every day. He was still playful, but his behavior was becoming more unpredictable. The bond they shared, though deep, wasn't enough to change the reality that the bear was no longer a cub, he was becoming a threat. Eventually, the day came when Finn had to go. Michael's parents contacted a wildlife sanctuary that specialized in rescuing and rehabilitating wild animals. The sanctuary would provide Finn with the space and environment he needed to live the life he was meant to live. Michael fought the decision with every ounce of his being. Finn was his, and he couldn't bear the thought of losing him. But the sanctuary was the best option for Finn's future, and Michael was too young to fight for him any longer. The day Finn left was one Michael would never forget. He stood at the edge of the yard, watching as the truck drove off, his heart broken. As the years passed, Michael grew older, but the memory of Finn never left him. Michael moved to Phoenix, started his career, and tried to build a life. But no matter how successful he became, there was always something missing, something that could never be replaced. He tried to forget about the bear cub he had raised, but the memories of their time together haunted him. Now, at 34 years old, Michael had nearly forgotten about the past. He'd created a new life, a new routine, far from the wilds of Arizona's desert. But sometimes, when he saw black bears on nature documentaries or heard a rustling in the bushes, the memories would come rushing back. He couldn't explain it, but there was always a part of him that wondered where Finn had gone, if he had survived the wild, or if he ever thought about Michael. The Arizona heat was still oppressive in the early fall, though the Phoenix skyline had long since lost its shimmering mirage-like quality. Michael sat in his modest apartment, staring at the desert landscape through the wide window, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The city around him hummed with activity, but for Michael, it felt distant, like a place where he didn't truly belong. The bustling streets, the clamor of voices, the cacophony of modern life, none of it could fill the emptiness he had carried with him for 24 years. His fingers drummed idly on the coffee table. He tried to focus on the report he had been working on for his environmental consulting job, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the past. Finn, the bear cub he had raised, the bond they had shared. Despite the years, Finn had never completely left his mind. There were times, quiet, solitary moments, when the memory of the black bear cub would surface, often at night when the weight of the day had worn away and Michael was left with only his thoughts. Michael had tried everything to move on. He'd surrounded himself with work, relationships, hobbies. But there was always something missing, something just out of reach. He couldn't escape the longing that had never truly gone away. The empty space Finn had left in his life was impossible to ignore, like a constant ache in the background of everything he did. One evening, Michael came across an old photo album while cleaning his apartment. The leather-bound album, filled with pictures from his childhood, sat on a dusty shelf. He hadn't opened it in years, not since he moved to Phoenix after leaving Flagstaff. But that evening, something compelled him to pull it down from the shelf. As he flipped through the pages, his eyes landed on a picture of himself as a young boy, no more than 7 years old, smiling widely next to a small, playful bear cub. The cub was small, almost comical in size, but Michael could still feel the warmth of their bond, the way the cub had followed him around, the way he had nuzzled into Michael's arms when they sat together in the yard. The sight of Finn in those old photos brought back a flood of memories. Finn, the cub who had been so playful and innocent, had once been his world. But now, as he looked at the photos, Michael's heart felt heavy with regret. He hadn't thought much about Finn in years, but now, looking at those photos, the pain of their separation came rushing back. The memory of saying goodbye was still so vivid. Michael could almost hear the sound of Finn's paws on the earth, the sadness in the cub's eyes as he was driven away by the wildlife authorities. The pain was still there, buried beneath the surface, and Michael couldn't ignore it any longer. The sunset that evening was particularly stunning, casting a golden light over the desert as Michael sat back in his chair. The quiet hum of the city outside seemed far away. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the peaceful moment wash over him. But then, suddenly, his phone buzzed on the table, breaking the silence. It was a text message from his old friend, Tom, someone Michael hadn't heard from in years. "Hey, Mike. You won't believe this, but I just saw a bear out in the wild near the Kaibab National Forest. It's huge, man. People are saying it's an adult black bear, and it looked like it was looking for something. Weird thing is, it was hanging around near the edge of town, just outside Flagstaff. Thought you'd want to know." Michael froze. He stared at the message, unsure of what to make of it. A bear? An adult black bear in the area near Flagstaff, where he had grown up. The connection to Finn was too obvious to ignore. He hadn't heard anything about bears in that area for years. But now, the thought of Finn, the bear cub he had raised, resurfaced like a tidal wave. Could it be him? Could it really be Finn, grown and living in the wild? Michael couldn't shake the thought, and something stirred deep inside him. It was as if the past, buried for so long, had finally come calling. Without thinking, Michael grabbed his jacket and headed out the door. Kaibab National Forest was about a 2-hour drive from Phoenix, but he didn't hesitate. The words, "looking for something," played over and over in his mind. Was Finn searching for him? Did he remember the bond they had shared? As the miles passed, the landscape began to change. The flat desert gave way to the mountainous terrain of northern Arizona, with towering pines and sweeping valleys. The air grew cooler, and Michael found himself holding his breath as he drove, his fingers gripping the steering wheel tightly. The road stretched ahead, but it felt like he was being pulled back in time, back to the days when Finn was just a cub, following him around and playing in the yard. Michael tried to steady his thoughts. He had no idea what he would find once he reached the Kaibab National Forest. What if it wasn't Finn? What if he had been imagining things? But he couldn't ignore the nagging feeling deep inside him. Something inside him told him that this might be the chance to find Finn, to answer the questions that had haunted him for years. As he neared the forest, he could feel the tension rising in his chest. He hadn't thought about it in a long time, but now, it was as if the reunion was all but inevitable. The reunion of a man and the wild animal he once raised, a reunion that would forever change the course of both of their lives. The dense forest loomed ahead as the sun began to set. Michael's headlights pierced the twilight, casting long shadows along the narrow road. He parked his car at the edge of a clearing just outside the forest and stepped out, his heart pounding in his chest. The silence of the Kaibab National Forest was overwhelming. The distant rustle of branches in the breeze, the faint hoot of an owl in the distance, this was the wild. The air felt cooler here, fresher than it had in the city. Michael paused for a moment, letting the sounds of the wilderness wash over him, trying to gather his thoughts. He couldn't shake the feeling that something, someone, was waiting for him. He began walking into the forest, following a narrow trail that led deeper into the trees. His breath quickened, and his pulse raced as he pressed on. The trees towered above him, their branches swaying gently in the wind, casting moving shadows across the ground. And then, just as he was beginning to feel the weight of uncertainty settle in, he saw it. The flash of dark fur in the distance, a silhouette standing tall against the moonlit sky. His heart stopped. Finn. The adult black bear stood a few yards ahead of him, its massive form partially hidden behind a large pine. The bear's eyes glinted in the moonlight, and for a moment, everything went still. Finn was bigger, stronger, his body rippling with muscle. But there was something familiar in those eyes, something that made Michael's breath catch in his throat. The bear stepped forward, and Michael's heart surged. This was it. The reunion. But as Michael took a step forward, the bear growled low in his throat, and Michael froze. The forest seemed to hold its breath as Michael stood frozen in the moonlight, staring at the massive figure before him. Finn, now an adult black bear, was bigger than Michael remembered, his coat thick and glossy, muscles rippling beneath the fur. The bear's dark eyes, however, were what caught Michael's attention. They were the same eyes he remembered from his childhood, the same depth of intelligence and recognition that had been there when Finn was just a cub. But now, those eyes were filled with a mixture of confusion and something else, recognition. Finn's nostrils flared as he sniffed the air, taking in Michael's scent. Michael's heart raced, and for a moment, all he could do was stare back at the bear, his breath coming in shallow gasps. "Finn," Michael whispered, his voice barely audible. "It's me. It's Michael." The bear made no move. The air was heavy with tension, and Michael's words seemed to linger in the stillness of the forest. Finn's body was tense, his large frame rigid, as if unsure whether to approach or retreat. Michael took a cautious step forward, his hands outstretched, but Finn growled low in his throat. Michael stopped, suddenly feeling the weight of the years that had passed between them. The bond they once shared, so strong in Michael's childhood, was now strained by the wild instincts that Finn had developed over the years. Michael's heart ached. This wasn't the playful cub he had raised, the one who would curl up beside him at night. This was a wild animal, and he wasn't sure what the reunion would bring. "Finn, I never wanted to leave you," Michael said, his voice thick with emotion. The words tumbled out, desperate and raw. "I never wanted to say goodbye." Finn's eyes flickered, but the bear didn't move. Michael felt his chest tighten, and he took another cautious step forward. For a moment, everything seemed to hang in the balance. Michael wanted to reach out, wanted to draw the bear close, to feel the familiar warmth of his companion again. But he knew it wasn't that simple. Finn was no longer the cub he had raised. He had grown into something untamable, something that no amount of affection could change. Michael took a deep breath, the cold mountain air filling his lungs. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry for what happened." But the bear's body language was tense. His massive form was still, but the growl rumbled in Finn's chest again, a warning this time. The bear's nostrils flared as he took a few steps forward, his massive paws barely making a sound on the forest floor. Michael's pulse quickened. Finn was remembering him, but the years of separation had taken their toll. Finn's instincts were sharp, wild. The bear wasn't sure what to make of the man who once raised him, and Michael understood. It wasn't just about the years apart, it was about the wildness that had taken root in Finn's heart. Michael's hand slowly dropped to his side. He understood now, Finn was a creature of the wild, not a pet, not a cub to be coddled. And Michael wasn't sure if the bond they once shared could survive the time that had passed and the life Finn had lived since then. Finn stepped closer, and Michael held his breath. The bear paused just out of arm's reach, his eyes locked onto Michael's. For a brief moment it was as if time stood still, the boy and the bear, locked in a standoff of mutual recognition. Then, without warning, Finn lowered his head. His ears flattened against his skull, and he let out a soft whimper, a sound that Michael had never thought he would hear from a wild animal. Michael's heart raced as he stepped forward again, cautiously, this time with his hands raised, palm out. Finn's posture softened slightly, but the bear was still uncertain. "Finn, it's okay," Michael said, his voice trembling with emotion. "I never wanted to leave you. I was just a kid. I didn't understand." Michael stopped talking, realizing there were no words that could change what had happened. The decision to give Finn up had been made by his parents, and at that time, Michael had been powerless to stop it. The pain of that loss, the guilt of not being able to protect Finn, had never fully left him. But now, here they were, standing in front of each other again, two souls that had been separated by time and circumstance. Finn let out another soft sound, this time less like a growl and more like a rumble of confusion. Michael felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was still some trace of the cub he had raised inside the wild creature in front of him. But as Michael took another step forward, the moment of connection was broken. Finn suddenly reared up on his hind legs, his claws scraping the bark of the nearby trees. He let out a loud, aggressive roar, his eyes flashing with the wildness that had taken root in him over the years. Michael staggered back, a chill running down his spine. This wasn't the playful cub anymore. Finn wasn't just a pet he had once cared for. He was a force of nature, a powerful animal whose loyalty and instincts were no longer tied to the boy he had known. Suddenly, Michael heard a distant shout. The bear's growl had drawn attention, and it wasn't long before a group of local hikers and wildlife officials appeared on the edge of the clearing. They had heard the commotion and were now rushing toward the scene, carrying radios and tranquilizer guns. "Is that a bear?" one of them shouted, his voice filled with alarm. "Stay back." Michael's heart raced as he turned toward the approaching group. They saw Finn, and fear rippled through them. The bear had grown to an intimidating size, and it wasn't just any wild animal, it was a local threat now, a bear that had ventured too close to civilization. The wildlife officials quickly set up a perimeter, and Michael realized he had only a few moments to act. Finn was still agitated, growling and pacing, his eyes darting from Michael to the strangers in the distance. He was scared, confused, and perhaps even angry. The bear no longer trusted humans the way he once had. "Finn!" Michael called out, his voice shaking. The bear's eyes flicked toward him, but the wildness in Finn's gaze was clear. He wasn't sure who Michael was anymore, he wasn't the boy who raised him. He was just another human, one who had abandoned him. For a long moment, it felt like nothing could bridge the distance between them. The wildlife officers were now only a few feet away, preparing to use a tranquilizer dart to subdue Finn. Michael's heart pounded in his chest. He had only one chance to act, and this time, it wasn't about rekindling their old bond. It was about survival, for both of them. "Stop!" Michael shouted, holding his hands up. The officers hesitated, their eyes wide with confusion. "Please. I can handle this." Michael's voice was calm, but the weight of the situation pressed down on him. Finn wasn't just any animal. He was Michael's responsibility, and he couldn't let him be taken down by tranquilizers. The officers looked at each other, reluctant but eventually stepping back. The bear's growls echoed through the night air, and Michael realized what he had to do. "Finn, it's okay. You have to go," Michael whispered, his voice full of emotion. He stepped forward, slowly, trying to close the distance between them. "I'm sorry. But you belong in the wild now. You're free." The bear's eyes softened for a moment, and for the briefest second, it felt like the cub Michael had once raised was still there. But then Finn turned and bolted into the trees, disappearing into the darkness. Michael stood there, heartbroken but resolute. The bond between them was no longer something they could hold on to. It had to be freedom now, for both of them. The night air was cooler now, and the sounds of the desert wilderness seemed to press in on Michael as he stood in the clearing, still feeling the pulse of the bear's growl echoing in his chest. Finn had disappeared into the woods, blending seamlessly with the wild landscape. The sound of his paws fading into the distance was the only thing Michael could hear, and the silence that followed felt both deafening and final. The wildlife officers, having been instructed to stand down, watched in quiet disbelief as Michael stood there, motionless, staring into the dark trees. He had just made a decision that would forever change the course of his life, and, in a way, Finn's as well. But did he make the right decision? "Michael, are you okay?" One of the officers, a young woman named Clara, asked cautiously, her voice soft but filled with concern. Michael didn't answer immediately. His body was numb, and his heart felt like it was lodged in his throat. He could still feel the weight of Finn's gaze, the bear's wild energy that had almost reached out to him before he disappeared. The bond was still there, but it was broken, no longer a gentle connection, but something wild, untamable. "Yeah. I think I'm fine." Michael's voice came out hoarse, and he forced himself to take a slow breath. He turned toward Clara and the other officers, who were waiting for him to explain his actions. "He's free. That's all that matters." Clara nodded, but there was a look of disquiet on her face. "We'll have to report this, you know. A bear this close to town, people are scared." Michael's heart tightened again. He understood their fear. He knew that Finn wasn't just a wild animal to the townspeople; to them, he was a danger, something that shouldn't be allowed near homes, schools, or people. But the bond they shared was different. Finn wasn't just some creature of the wild. He had been Michael's friend, and part of him still was. "I know, but you have to understand, he wasn't just a bear. He was part of my life." Michael paused, shaking his head. "I raised him, and it's not easy just to forget that. I can't let him be treated like an animal that needs to be put down or relocated." Clara looked at him, sympathy in her eyes, but there was no denying the reality of the situation. "I get it, Michael. But you need to realize that not everyone understands that bond. Finn is no longer a cub, and this is a dangerous animal we're talking about." Michael closed his eyes for a moment, trying to push back the pain that threatened to overwhelm him. "I know. I don't know what else to do. He's part of me." The officers discussed what to do next, taking steps to ensure the bear didn't cause more disruptions, but Michael wasn't really listening anymore. His thoughts were far away, replaying the moments when he'd seen Finn again, the look in his eyes, the strength in his presence, and the painful realization that the cub he once knew had grown into something untamable. When Michael finally returned home to Phoenix, the weight of what had just happened still hung heavy on him. The drive back had been a blur, his mind consumed by everything that had occurred. He knew he had made the right choice, but the feeling of loss was overwhelming. The bear, the cub he had raised with so much love, was now wild, living by his instincts, without the boy who had cared for him. At the small apartment Michael called home, the loneliness felt louder than ever. He hadn't seen his parents or his sister in over a year, busy with work and the chaos of city life. But now, more than ever, he needed to reconnect with them. After a quick dinner and a long shower, he called his mother, hoping to find some comfort in her voice. "Hi, Mom. It's Michael." He forced the words out, but they sounded strange, distant. Rachel Hall, his mother, answered after a couple of rings, her voice light and full of warmth. "Michael. How are you, sweetheart? We've missed you." Her words were always full of love, but tonight, they felt like a distant echo. "I've been okay, Mom. Just, a lot has happened." Michael rubbed his hand over his face, feeling exhaustion set in. "What's going on? You sound so tired." Michael hesitated, unsure if he should tell her about the events of the last few days. He wanted to, but the words didn't come easily. There was still so much guilt, and the idea that Finn had been set free made him feel like he had betrayed the cub in some way. "I saw Finn again, Mom." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. He could hear his mother's sharp intake of breath, and it made his stomach churn. "Michael, please tell me you didn't do anything reckless." Her voice was cautious now, filled with concern. "He's okay, Mom. He's free now. I didn't want to cause trouble, but I couldn't just let him be treated like some wild animal. He's still Finn. He's part of my life." Rachel's voice softened. "You know how dangerous that is, Michael. He's not a cub anymore, and you can't just let him roam around like that. You can't put yourself in danger, or anyone else." The weight of her words hit harder than he expected. He knew the risks, and he wasn't naive enough to believe that Finn could ever be domesticated again. But part of him couldn't shake the feeling that Finn was lost in the wilderness, trying to find his way back to the person he had once trusted. "I know, Mom. I know." Michael's voice faltered. "But I had to see him again. I needed to know if he remembered me, if I was still part of his life." Rachel paused, and then, with a sigh, she spoke more softly. "I know, honey. I know you did what you thought was right. But remember, the world's not like it used to be. Finn belongs in the wild now, just like you belong with your own life. You need to let go, Michael. Let go." The words stung more than he expected. He had spent so many years holding on to the memory of Finn, trying to recreate the past in his mind. But now, in the wake of their reunion, he realized she was right. Finn was no longer the bear cub who had followed him around. He was his own creature, and the wild had shaped him into something Michael could never fully control again. The next few weeks were a blur for Michael. He tried to return to his consulting job, his routine, but the memories of Finn never quite faded. He often found himself staring at the desert landscape, wondering where the bear had gone, what his life had become since their last meeting. He still remembered Finn's growl, the recognition in the bear's eyes, the look that had once been filled with affection now tinged with wildness and suspicion. Michael couldn't help but feel guilty. Guilty for raising Finn in the first place, and guilty for setting him free. The bond they once shared was now just a memory, and that memory felt like a shadow he couldn't escape. One evening, as he stood by his window, looking out at the Arizona night, Michael made a decision. He would continue his search for Finn, not to take him back, but to see if the bear was surviving, to see if the creature who had once been his closest companion was still out there in the world. The wild had claimed Finn, but Michael knew he couldn't just move on. He had to know if his bear was okay. It was early morning when Michael began his journey back to the Kaibab National Forest. The first rays of dawn stretched across the horizon, painting the sky in soft hues of gold and pink, but the beauty of the scene felt distant to him. He sat behind the wheel of his old truck, the engine humming steadily beneath him, but his mind was miles away, consumed by thoughts of the bear he had once raised, Finn. After their brief reunion, Michael had barely been able to sleep. He couldn't shake the images of Finn's eyes, recognition, mixed with an unfamiliar wildness, as though the bear had been torn between his past and the world he now inhabited. Michael knew Finn wasn't a cub anymore. He was a creature of the wild, a force to be reckoned with. But still, the longing for the cub that had been his companion remained. It wasn't about taking Finn back or trying to tame him again, it was about making sure that he was okay, that the bond they shared didn't have to be lost to time. Finn's survival mattered to Michael in a way he could hardly explain. The boy who had raised him all those years ago had not forgotten. The road to Kaibab was long, winding through the pinyon juniper forests and over rocky hills that led into the mountains. As Michael drove, he thought about the days when he had been a child, running through the desert, his footsteps light and carefree. The world seemed so much simpler back then. But now, he was a man, burdened with the weight of a decision he had made as a child. The choice to give Finn up had been painful, and the memory had never truly faded. The landscape outside his truck window blurred as he reached the edge of the Kaibab National Forest, and the trees grew denser, blocking out the light. Michael knew this area well. It wasn't far from Flagstaff, where he had grown up, but it felt like another world entirely. Here, the air smelled of pine and earth, and the distant sounds of wildlife echoed through the trees. Michael parked his truck near a clearing and stepped out. He grabbed his backpack, filled with supplies for the day, and checked the map he had downloaded on his phone. He'd been in contact with a few locals who had seen the adult black bear near the outskirts of the forest, but no one knew exactly where it had gone. He adjusted his hat and set off along the trail, the crunch of fallen leaves and dry twigs under his boots the only sound. His eyes scanned the ground, looking for any signs of Finn's tracks. The bear's paw prints would be easy to identify, large, round, with claw marks that could tear through the earth with ease. As Michael hiked deeper into the forest, he was acutely aware of the tension building inside him. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was pursuing something that he couldn't fully reclaim. Finn was out there somewhere, but the bond they had once shared had been lost to time. The bear was no longer the playful cub Michael had raised. Now, Finn was part of something far bigger than their childhood companionship. Michael had known that letting Finn go was the right thing to do. Finn was wild, and he belonged in the wilderness, not in a house. But the guilt he felt had never truly subsided. What if I'm making a mistake, he muttered to himself, half to the forest, half to the memory of Finn. What if he needs me? But he had to face the truth. He couldn't undo the years, couldn't force Finn to be the cub again. The bear's instincts had taken over, and Michael knew he couldn't change that. He stopped for a moment, leaning against a tree to catch his breath. The forest around him was quiet, almost eerily still, but there was a subtle life to it, squirrels scurrying in the branches, the call of a red-tailed hawk overhead, and the occasional rustle of underbrush as small creatures moved about. This was Finn's world now, and Michael had to accept that. Suddenly, as he walked deeper into the woods, Michael noticed something. In the distance, just beyond a thicket of scrubby bushes, there was a clearing with fresh bear tracks, large and unmistakable. The paw prints were deep, embedded in the soft earth where the ground had been damp from recent rainfall. His heart skipped a beat. Finn. He was close. Michael crouched down to examine the tracks more closely. The footprints were still fresh, the edges sharp and clear. The bear had passed this way not long ago. There was a part of him that wanted to rush ahead, to find the bear and call out his name, but Michael held himself back. Finn wasn't a pet, and he wasn't a child's playmate anymore. The bear was wild, and he had to be careful. He followed the trail, step by cautious step, his eyes scanning the trees, the underbrush, looking for any sign of movement. He was both eager and terrified. What if Finn didn't want to see him? What if the bear didn't recognize him? Or worse, what if Finn had become so wild that he wouldn't even remember their bond? Just as Michael was about to take another step, he stopped. There, in the distance, hidden behind a cluster of pines, Michael saw something, a massive shadow moving through the trees. His pulse quickened. There, standing at the edge of the clearing, was Finn. The bear's fur was thick and wild, his dark eyes glinting in the fading light of the afternoon. He was larger than Michael had remembered, almost too large for comfort, his muscle-bound frame a testament to the years spent living alone in the wild. Finn's expression was unreadable, and his posture was tense as he scanned the area, ears flicking back and forth. Michael's breath caught in his throat. Finn. The bear turned his head slowly, and for a moment, Michael could have sworn he saw recognition in Finn's eyes. It was brief, fleeting, almost like a flash of the bear cub he had raised. But then, just as quickly, the moment passed, and Finn let out a low, deep growl. His body stiffened, and Michael felt the air around him grow heavy with tension. The bear wasn't sure. Michael wasn't sure either. Michael stood perfectly still. His heart was pounding, but he didn't take his eyes off Finn. The bear's growl subsided into a low rumble, but Finn didn't approach, nor did he retreat. He was watching, waiting, just like Michael. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Michael could feel the connection between them, fragile and tentative. Finn wasn't the same bear cub he had raised. He had grown, learned the ways of the wild, and survived on his own. But there was something deep in the bear's gaze, something that Michael couldn't deny. Finn remembered him. Michael took a small step forward, lowering his voice. "Finn, it's me. Michael." Finn's ears flicked, and for a brief second, his posture softened. But the next instant, he growled again, more softly this time, and began to back away, disappearing into the shadows of the trees. Michael froze, knowing that the bond they once shared couldn't be fully restored. The wild had taken over, and Finn was no longer the cub who had trusted him. But at least he knew one thing for sure: Finn remembered him. There was still something there, however distant. As the bear disappeared into the woods, Michael stood motionless, his heart heavy with the realization that he couldn't bring Finn back into his life. The wild had claimed him, and Michael had to accept that. Michael stood in the clearing for what felt like an eternity, long after Finn had disappeared into the shadows of the Kaibab National Forest. His heart thudded in his chest, the silence around him heavy, thick with the weight of his thoughts. Finn was gone again, vanished into the wild, but Michael couldn't shake the feeling that their bond wasn't completely lost. No matter how much time had passed, no matter how much the bear had changed, Michael knew Finn still remembered him. But remembering him wasn't enough. Finn was a wild animal now, one that didn't belong in a world that was ruled by human hands. Michael stood there, in the middle of the forest, wondering if his search for the bear had been a mistake. If he had to let go, really let go, then what was the point of seeking out an animal that had moved on from their shared past? The drive back to Phoenix was quiet. The road stretched endlessly in front of him, a desert expanse that seemed to mirror the emptiness Michael felt inside. His thoughts replayed the moments he'd shared with Finn, the excitement of their first meeting, the joy of raising him, the way the bear had nuzzled into his chest when he was just a cub. The reunion had been bittersweet. There had been recognition, but also distance. Finn was wild now, and that truth hurt Michael more than he had anticipated. When Michael returned to his small apartment, the loneliness was overwhelming. The apartment felt like a shell of what it had been before. The memories of Finn lingered, like the ghosts of a past that could never be reclaimed. He collapsed on the couch, staring at the ceiling, unsure of what to do next. He had found Finn, but it hadn't been the joyful reunion he had imagined. The wild animal in Finn had taken over, and Michael was left with the reality that he could not undo the years, the separation, or the bond that had been broken by time and circumstance. But Finn wasn't the only thing on Michael's mind. As the days passed, the tension between Michael and his family began to grow. His mother, Rachel, had been concerned from the moment she heard about his search for Finn. She had warned him, urged him to let go. But the guilt of letting the bear go had haunted him, and despite everything, Michael couldn't give up on Finn. One evening, after returning from another futile search for Finn, Michael decided to visit his parents. He needed to see them, to talk to them, to share the weight of everything that had happened. The house in Flagstaff was the same as it had always been, small, familiar, with the smell of home-cooked meals wafting through the air. But as Michael stepped through the door, he could feel the tension that had been building ever since his last visit. Mike. His father, John, greeted him curtly, offering a tight handshake. His mother, Rachel, was already seated at the kitchen table, looking concerned as ever. Mom, Dad. Michael gave a weary smile, though he knew it was a half-hearted attempt. His parents had always been supportive, but the search for Finn had put a strain on their relationship. It wasn't just about the bear, it was about the unresolved guilt Michael had carried for years. "How are you, son?" John asked, settling into a chair. "You've been gone a while." "I've been looking for Finn." Michael's voice faltered slightly as he sat down at the table. "I found him." "Well, I saw him." "But..." "Mike, this has to stop." Rachel interrupted, her voice firm but gentle. She placed her hands on the table, looking at her son with a mixture of love and worry. "You're not going to get him back. He's not a cub anymore. He's a bear, Michael. A wild animal." Michael felt his chest tighten. The weight of his mother's words hit him harder than he expected. The truth that Finn had grown into a wild animal, a creature he couldn't control, was something Michael had tried to deny. But Rachel was right. "I know, Mom." Michael's voice was barely above a whisper. "I know. But I saw him again. I had to know he was okay." Rachel sighed, her expression softening. "I understand, Michael. I know you wanted to find him, but you can't keep chasing this. It's not healthy. You need to move on. But I can't. Michael's voice cracked, and he had to swallow before continuing. I raised him, Mom. He's part of me. I can't just forget him. His father spoke next, his voice calm but filled with quiet authority. You don't have to forget him, Mike. But you need to let go. For your own sake. For Finn's sake too. He's out there, living the life he was meant to live. Michael's stomach clenched as he thought of Finn, the wild bear that had once been his closest companion, now lost in the forest. The truth was becoming clearer to him every day. Finn belonged in the wild, and Michael wasn't the person who could keep him in the human world anymore. The bond they shared was something that couldn't survive in a world that didn't understand it. That night, after the conversation with his parents, Michael found himself back in his apartment, lying on the couch, staring at the ceiling again. The quiet of the room settled over him, and the weight of his decisions pressed down harder. He had gone to the forest, hoping for some sign, some flicker of recognition from Finn. But he knew now that the wild had claimed Finn, and Michael had to let go. He couldn't keep chasing a past that wasn't his anymore. The bear was free, and Michael had to respect that. It was time to accept the truth. Finn wasn't the bear cub he had raised anymore. He was a creature of the wild, a force of nature, and Michael had to let him be that. The next morning, Michael woke early and drove to a nearby wildlife refuge. He had been avoiding it for years, but today, he needed to do something different. He needed to let go. The refuge was dedicated to rehabilitating wildlife and providing a safe environment for animals that couldn't survive in the wild on their own. Michael had always believed in the work they did, but today, it felt like something he needed to do for himself, and for Finn. He walked into the office and asked to speak to someone in charge. The director, a woman named Laura, greeted him warmly but with a hint of confusion. "How can I help you today?" Laura asked. Michael hesitated for a moment. "I need to know how I can help support the sanctuary. Maybe even help find a way to protect the wild animals out there, like black bears." Laura raised an eyebrow. "You mean, like the bears out in Kaibab National Forest?" Michael nodded. "Yeah. I need to learn more about how we can help them stay wild. I think I've been trying to control something I can't. I need to make things right." Laura nodded slowly, understanding the weight behind his words. "It's not easy, letting go. But sometimes, that's the best thing we can do, for them and for ourselves." Michael smiled softly, knowing that he was taking the first step toward truly moving on. Finn was part of his past, but the wild was where he belonged. And Michael, he was finally ready to accept that. The days following Michael's visit to the wildlife refuge felt like a turning point. The air in Phoenix seemed a little cooler, the sky a little clearer. For the first time in years, he could feel the weight of the past starting to lift, slowly, almost imperceptibly. Finn was out there, in the wild, living the life he was meant to live, and Michael had finally come to terms with it. Michael spent the next few weeks at the refuge, meeting with the staff and learning more about the challenges that wild animals faced in the modern world. He spoke with Laura, the director, about how he could help the sanctuary in any way he could. While he couldn't bring Finn back, he realized that he could contribute to something greater. He could help protect the wildlife that had once been part of his life. One afternoon, after a long day of work at the refuge, Michael found himself standing at the edge of a meadow, overlooking a small pond surrounded by trees. The sun was just beginning to dip below the horizon, casting a warm orange glow over the landscape. It was a peaceful, quiet place, a contrast to the chaotic, fast-paced life he had been living in the city. For the first time in a long while, Michael felt at peace. "It's a beautiful spot, isn't it?" Laura's voice broke the silence. She had joined him at the edge of the pond, her hands in the pockets of her jacket. "Yeah, it really is." Michael's gaze lingered on the shimmering water. He felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for this place, for the work they were doing here. But something else was stirring inside him, a sense of purpose. I never thought I'd find peace again. Michael admitted, his voice quiet. I thought I was just going to be chasing ghosts for the rest of my life, but this is different. I feel like I'm doing something meaningful. Laura nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. It's not easy, Michael. Letting go is never easy. But sometimes, it's about finding the place where you can make the most difference. Not for yourself, but for the animals who need it most. Michael smiled softly, the weight in his chest easing just a little. I think you're right. I don't know if I'll ever stop missing Finn. But I do know that this feels like the right thing to do. As Michael continued his work at the refuge, he began to reconnect with the community. His efforts to raise awareness about wildlife conservation were met with positive feedback. More people from Flagstaff and the surrounding areas reached out to offer their support, whether it was through donations, volunteering, or simply spreading the word about the importance of protecting the wildlife that surrounded them. It wasn't just about Finn anymore. It was about all the animals that Michael had learned to love over the years, the bears, the mountain lions, the eagles, the deer. He felt a deep responsibility to protect them, to ensure that the wild spaces in Arizona remained untouched, where creatures could live freely, away from the encroaching dangers of human development. One evening, as Michael was finishing up a meeting at the refuge, he received a call from his sister, Emily. It had been a few weeks since they last spoke, and Michael hadn't told her much about his recent adventures. Hey, Mike. I heard about what you've been doing. I'm really proud of you, Emily said with excitement. She sounded more upbeat than he had heard in a long time. Thanks, Em. I think I'm finally figuring it out. It's been a long road, but I'm starting to feel like I'm in the right place. Emily paused for a moment, her voice softer now. I know you've been through a lot, Mike. Losing Finn, and all. But you've done something amazing. You're helping others, even if it's not the way you imagined. Michael felt a small pang in his chest. He didn't want to talk about Finn too much, not yet, but hearing his sister's words made him realize how far he had come. He had let go, in the way that mattered most. He couldn't change the past, but he could shape the future. One afternoon, after a particularly long day at the refuge, Michael found himself back at the Kaibab National Forest. He hadn't returned since the night of his reunion with Finn. The forest felt different now, less filled with regret and more with a quiet acceptance. He parked his truck near the clearing where they had first met, and for the first time in weeks, he sat in the silence, listening to the distant sounds of the wilderness. Michael closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He could still hear the soft rustle of leaves, the gentle hum of the forest around him. In his mind, he saw Finn's face, the memories of the cub he had raised, of the bond they once shared. It was no longer painful to remember. Instead, it was peaceful, like the forest around him. Goodbye, Finn. Michael whispered into the wind. He didn't know if the bear would hear him, or if he was even still out there, roaming the wilds. But somehow, in that moment, Michael felt like he had finally let go. As he opened his eyes and looked around, he saw something in the distance, a shadow moving through the trees. It wasn't Finn, but it was another black bear, large and majestic, its form moving gracefully through the forest. Michael smiled softly. The wild was thriving. The animals were surviving, just as they always had. Finn was out there, living his life, and Michael had played his part in that story. It was time to leave the past behind and focus on the future. For Finn, for the bears, and for the wilderness that Michael had learned to love again. Months passed since Michael's reunion with Finn. The world around him seemed to shift in subtle ways, new projects, new opportunities, and a growing sense of fulfillment that Michael had not felt in years. His work with the wildlife refuge had gained momentum, and the small efforts he had made to reconnect with his community had turned into something more meaningful. Michael had found his purpose, not just in the world of wildlife conservation, but in building bridges between people and the animals they too often ignored. He spent his days organizing fundraisers, talking to schools about the importance of protecting wildlife, and leading hiking expeditions where people could witness the natural beauty of Arizona's wilderness. He had never imagined his life would take this turn, but it felt right. It felt like what he was always meant to do. One afternoon, while sitting at his desk in the refuge's small office, Michael received an unexpected phone call. The voice on the other end was Griffin Walker, a well-known environmental activist and the head of a national conservation organization. Michael had heard of Griffin but never met him in person. Michael Hall. Griffin's voice was confident and warm. "I've heard a lot about your efforts in the Kaibab National Forest and the Wildlife Refuge. I think what you're doing is extraordinary. We're planning a new project, something big, and I'd like to bring you in." Michael sat up straight, taken aback by the offer. "You want me to be involved?" Griffin laughed lightly. "Absolutely. We're looking to create a national campaign to protect and preserve the wild spaces in the Southwest, particularly areas like Kaibab. We need someone with your experience, someone who knows the land and understands the importance of wildlife conservation on a personal level." Michael's heart skipped a beat. The opportunity was overwhelming, and yet, it felt like the natural next step in his journey. "I'd love to help." Michael's response was immediate. The idea of working on a larger scale, bringing more attention to the issues he had spent years advocating for, was an opportunity he couldn't turn down. Griffin's voice softened. "We'll get the details sorted. I'll be in touch soon. This is going to be big, Michael. I'm glad you're on board." As Michael ended the call, a sense of purpose washed over him. This was it, the turning point in his journey. His mission was becoming bigger than just his own redemption. It was about protecting the wild, about ensuring that the next generation would experience the beauty of nature the way he had, through his childhood, through Finn, and through the wilderness that had shaped both their lives. As word of Michael's new involvement with the national campaign spread, the community's response was overwhelmingly positive. Flagstaff and the surrounding areas rallied around his cause, coming together to support conservation efforts in the region. Michael spoke at local gatherings, and with every word he spoke, it became clearer that he had found the support and acceptance he had once sought. One evening, during a community event at the local Flagstaff Nature Center, Michael stood before a crowd of residents, local wildlife enthusiasts, and conservationists. The atmosphere was buzzing with excitement as people eagerly awaited his speech. "I never imagined that my journey would lead me here, standing before all of you today, talking about something that is so close to my heart." Michael began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "A long time ago, I raised a bear cub, Finn, and I thought I'd lost him forever. But what I didn't realize was that the bond we shared wasn't just about us. It was about something much bigger, the wild that connects all of us." He paused, allowing the words to sink in, watching as the crowd listened intently. It's easy to forget about the wilderness, to overlook the creatures that roam the land. But if we don't protect these spaces, we risk losing a part of ourselves. Michael continued, his voice strong. "Finn may have been a bear, but he taught me something that will last my entire life. We have a responsibility to protect the wild, because it's part of who we are." The crowd responded with applause, some standing in recognition, others nodding thoughtfully. The message was clear, Michael's journey had resonated deeply with those who understood the importance of nature and wildlife conservation. In the months that followed, Michael's family began to see the full impact of his work. At first, his parents had been skeptical of his obsession with Finn and his pursuit of wildlife conservation, but they gradually came to understand. His sister Emily, especially, began to see how much Michael had grown. One evening, after a successful fundraiser for the Wildlife Refuge, Michael received a call from his mother, Rachel. Her voice sounded lighter, less concerned, and more supportive than it had been in the past. "Michael, we're so proud of you. I don't think I've said that enough. What you're doing, it's amazing." Rachel's voice was warm with pride, and Michael could hear the smile in her words. "Thanks, Mom." Michael smiled softly. "It means a lot to hear that from you. I know I've spent a lot of time chasing something, but I think I finally found it." Rachel paused for a moment. You've always had a special connection to animals. I see that now, more than ever. Finn was a part of your life, and I understand that now. You're doing more than helping wildlife, you're helping yourself, too. Michael felt a sense of peace wash over him. It had taken time, but his parents finally understood his mission. Finn's legacy, though bittersweet, had become the foundation for something bigger than himself. His parents had come to accept that the bond Michael had with Finn was one that would never be severed. It wasn't about ownership or control, it was about love, respect, and the natural world they had always cherished. Michael spent the next few months traveling to different parts of Arizona, meeting with local conservationists, and speaking about the importance of protecting the wild. His message was one of hope, that the wild could still be saved, that creatures like Finn still had a chance to thrive. His involvement with the national campaign only grew, and soon, Michael's name was being recognized beyond Arizona. He was becoming a voice for the wild animals, the forests, and the mountains that had shaped his life. But even as his professional life blossomed, Michael knew that his journey wasn't just about work. It was about finding peace within himself, about reconciling with the past, and about letting go of things he could never change. Finn was out there, living freely in the wilderness, and that was enough for Michael. One quiet evening, as Michael sat on the porch of his small cabin near the refuge, watching the sunset paint the sky in rich shades of purple and gold, he felt the familiar peace that he had always sought. The land stretched out before him, wild and untamed, and somewhere in the distance, he knew Finn was roaming. For the first time in a long time, Michael felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. The wild was his home, and in it, he had found a new family, a family of creatures, landscapes, and people who understood the power of love and connection, no matter how wild the world may be. Months had passed since Michael had fully committed himself to his new mission, protecting the wild. His involvement with the National Conservation Campaign had opened doors he had never imagined, and his work had garnered attention across the country. The message he shared was simple, yet powerful. The wild places that had shaped his childhood, that had raised him alongside Finn, were worth protecting, not just for their beauty, but for their irreplaceable role in the world's ecological balance. Michael had become a spokesperson for wildlife conservation, and though he never expected fame or recognition, he found that his voice carried weight. He was invited to speak at national conferences, to appear in documentaries, and to lead wildlife tours across the country. But through it all, one thing had remained constant, his love for the land, and his unshakable connection to the wild that had first been shared with Finn. The Kaibab National Forest remained Michael's anchor, the place where he could find peace, even amidst the increasing attention his work was receiving. He made frequent trips back to the forest, walking its trails, reminding himself of the wild beauty that still existed, despite the constant encroachment of the modern world. It was a cool fall morning when Michael received a call that took him by surprise. It was from Laura, the director of the wildlife refuge. "Michael, we've been approached by the local government. They want to start a new initiative for wildlife preservation, and they're asking for your help." Laura's voice crackled with excitement. "They're planning a new park, one that will connect Kaibab with other protected lands. It's going to be a massive project. They want you to be involved." Michael leaned back in his chair, the weight of her words sinking in. A new park? Something that would help preserve the very land where Finn had roamed? It was the opportunity he had dreamed of, but also something that felt deeply personal. He had been fighting for years to protect the land, but now, the impact he could make would be far-reaching. "This is huge, Laura." Michael's voice was filled with awe. "This could change everything." "It will, Michael. But we need your expertise. And we need your voice." Laura paused for a moment. "I know how much Kaibab means to you. You'll be at the forefront of this initiative. It's your chance to leave a real legacy." Michael couldn't help but smile. Finn's legacy had become his own. It wasn't about ownership or control, it was about ensuring the wild spaces that had shaped him would be preserved for future generations. And now, with this new project, Michael had the chance to do just that. A few weeks later, Michael stood in front of a crowd in Flagstaff, a small crowd of locals, conservationists, and officials. The air was crisp and fresh, with the scent of pine and earth filling his lungs. Today was the official announcement of the new park project that would connect Kaibab National Forest with several other conservation areas. As Michael stepped up to the podium, he felt the weight of the moment. His journey had come full circle, from the boy who raised a bear cub, to the man standing before the community, advocating for the preservation of the very wildlands that had shaped his life. "Thank you all for being here today," Michael began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Today, we are not just announcing the creation of a new park. We are standing up for the wild. We are ensuring that the forests, the mountains, and the creatures that call this land home will be protected for generations to come." The crowd applauded, and Michael paused for a moment, allowing the applause to settle. But this project is about more than just the trees, the rivers, or the wildlife. It's about the connections we form with the land. I know, because I've felt it. I raised a bear cub once, Finn. And though he is long gone, the lessons he taught me remain with me every day. There was a moment of silence as Michael let his words sink in. "Finn taught me that the wild is not something we control, but something we respect." He looked out across the crowd, meeting their eyes. "This park isn't just a place to visit, it's a place to connect with nature, to remember what it means to live alongside the creatures that have always been here." The crowd erupted in applause, and for the first time in years, Michael felt the full weight of his journey, his connection to Finn, his deep love for the land, and his mission to preserve it. The following months were filled with excitement, construction, and planning. The new park took shape as a massive area that would span several thousand acres, connecting the Kaibab National Forest, Grand Canyon National Park, and other protected lands. The project was massive, but it was Michael's vision, a vision born out of his experiences with Finn, that drove its success. During this time, Michael found himself returning to the Kaibab Forest more and more. Each trip allowed him to reconnect with the land, reminding him of the bond he had once shared with the bear. He would sit by the clearing where they had first met, watching the sun set over the rugged mountains and the tall pines. Sometimes, he swore he could still feel Finn's presence there, wild, free, and untamed. One afternoon, Michael stood at the edge of the park site, his eyes scanning the vast expanse of land that would soon become part of the new wildlife corridor. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow across the landscape. The wind rustled through the trees, and for a moment, everything felt still. As Michael stood there, a sense of peace washed over him. He had made the right choice, both for himself and for Finn. He had let the wild go, had let Finn be free, but now, Michael was doing his part to ensure that future generations would experience the same freedom. For the first time in years, Michael allowed himself to breathe. He had done everything he could to protect the wild. And in doing so, he had found his own place in the world. "Goodbye, Finn." Michael whispered into the wind, though he knew the bear wasn't there. He no longer needed to search for Finn, he had found peace in knowing that the wild was thriving, and the legacy of his childhood companion would live on through the land they had shared. The bear had gone into the wild, and now, Michael had found his own wildness, one that would forever be intertwined with the land, the animals, and the beauty of the world around him. A bond that was forged in the wild, a friendship that time couldn't erase, and a choice that would change everything. Michael's journey with Finn wasn't just about saving a bear, it was about learning to let go, to heal, and to protect the wild that they once shared. In the end, their connection wasn't just about the past, it was about securing a future for all creatures of the wild. If you've ever wondered what it means to truly care for something, to love something beyond measure, this story will remind you. Sometimes, the most difficult thing we can do is let go, but the most beautiful thing we can do is ensure their freedom, their legacy, and their place in the world. This is the story of a boy and a bear, and the wild that shaped them both.